Pilot demands black woman prove she owns the jet. Her husband's call gets him fired instantly. Have you ever faced a moment where someone looked at you and decided they already knew your worth? Today, we dive into a story where assumptions collided with reality in the most dramatic way. A black woman, standing tall against prejudice, finds herself in an unexpected battle for respect on the steps of a private jet. But what happened next left everyone stunned, especially the man who thought he held all the power. Before we begin, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. If you love inspiring stories of resilience and justice, make sure to hit that like button, share this video, and subscribe for more incredible tales. Your support helps us share these impactful stories with even more people. Now let's get into it. The late afternoon sun bathed the private airstrip in a golden hue as Loretta Graham stepped out of the sleek black sedan. Her heels clicked softly against the pavement, each step deliberate, her presence commanding attention. She was dressed impeccably, a tailored white blazer, matching trousers, and a silk scarf draped elegantly around her neck. Her natural curls framed her face, a silent statement of confidence and pride. She paused briefly, her almond brown eyes scanning the airstrip. The jet she'd chartered sat in the distance, its polished exterior gleaming like silver under the sunlight. It was the first time she'd booked a private flight through her husband's company. Loretta wasn't one to flaunt wealth, but this trip was important, a time-sensitive negotiation that could make or break her independent fashion line's expansion into Europe. The private lounge was quieter than she expected. A handful of staff milled about, their eyes darting to her as she approached. Some offered polite smiles, others hesitant glances. Loretta was used to this, a silent calculation of her worth based on her appearance, her skin tone, her very existence in spaces like this. But Loretta had long learned the art of composure. She approached the check-in desk where a young woman in a Navy uniform greeted her. "Good afternoon, ma'am. May I see your identification and reservation details, please?" the woman asked, her tone professional though tinged with curiosity. Loretta handed over her documents with a polite smile. "Loretta Graham, Flight 781 heading to Paris." The attendant's eyes flicked to the name, then back to Loretta. There was a pause, a momentary flicker of surprise before she quickly regained her composure. "Thank you, Mrs. Graham. Everything is in order. Your jet is prepped and ready. Please proceed to the tarmac." "Thank you," Loretta replied warmly, reclaiming her documents and heading toward the waiting plane. As she neared the jet, a tall figure emerged from its shadow. Captain Peter Morrison. His posture was rigid, his uniform crisp, and his expression unreadable. Yet, there was something about the way his eyes narrowed, scanning her up and down, that sent a faint chill down Loretta's spine. She knew that look all too well. Peter stepped forward, blocking the staircase leading into the jet. "Excuse me, ma'am," he began, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Can I help you?" Loretta stopped in her tracks, her brow furrowing slightly. "Yes, I'm Loretta Graham. This is my jet, I believe. Everything should be in order." His eyes narrowed further, disbelief flashing across his face. "Your jet?" "Yes," she replied, her tone steady but firm. Peter let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This jet is reserved for a private client, and that client," Loretta interjected, her voice unwavering, "is me." The pilot's smirk faded, replaced by an icy professionalism. "Ma'am, I'll need to see some proof before I can let you board." Loretta tilted her head slightly, suppressing the irritation bubbling beneath the surface. She had prepared for the usual stares, the subtle murmurs, but this was blatant. Still, she wasn't one to raise her voice. Instead, she pulled out her reservation details, holding them out calmly. Peter barely glanced at the papers before scoffing. "Anyone could print something like this. I'll need confirmation from the account holder or someone higher up." Loretta's lips tightened. "Isn't that what this reservation proves? I don't think we need to escalate this further." His response was a curt laugh, devoid of humor. "Security protocols, ma'am. Surely you understand. If you can't provide proper verification, I'm afraid you won't be boarding." The sting of his words was sharp, but Loretta refused to let it show. She squared her shoulders, her voice cooling. "Captain Morrison, I suggest you check again. I've met the requirements and followed the process." Peter raised an eyebrow, his tone dripping with condescension. "And I suggest you step aside until this is sorted." The condescension, the implication, the outright disrespect, it was all too familiar. Loretta took a deep breath, steadying herself. She had dealt with men like him before, men who judged her by the color of her skin rather than the content of her character. But today, she had neither the time nor the patience for their games. She slipped her phone from her bag and dialed a number, her movements deliberate and calm. The call connected almost instantly. "Hi, Theodore," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "We have a situation." The pilot's smirk faltered slightly as he watched her, but Loretta didn't glance his way. Her attention was on the man on the other end of the line, the one person who could put an end to this nonsense with a single word. And so, the stage was set. Loretta Graham wasn't just here for a flight. She was here to teach a lesson Captain Morrison wouldn't soon forget. Loretta held the phone to her ear, her voice steady and composed despite the storm of emotions brewing beneath the surface. She wasn't angry, not yet. Anger was a luxury she couldn't afford at the moment. Instead, she focused on the calm, deliberate tone that had always served her well in tense situations. On the other end of the line, Theodore Graham, her husband, answered with his characteristic warmth. "Hey, Loretta. Everything okay?" Loretta took a slow breath, her eyes briefly closing to center herself. "Not exactly," she said. "I'm at the airstrip. There's an issue with the pilot." Theodore's tone shifted immediately, the warmth replaced by concern. "What kind of issue?" She glanced at Captain Morrison, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a faint smirk still lingering on his face, as though he were certain of his authority in this situation. Loretta's lips pressed into a thin line. "He's refusing to let me board. Claims I need to prove I'm the client. He didn't even bother checking my reservation properly." There was silence on the line, a charged pause that spoke volumes. When Theodore finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, but there was an edge to it. "Refusing to let you board? What exactly did he say?" Loretta kept her gaze steady on the pilot, her voice betraying none of the frustration she felt. "He implied that someone like me wouldn't own a jet like this. Said I don't fit the profile." Theodore's exhale was audible, sharp, and clipped. "I see," he said, the weight of those two words carrying all the anger he held in check. "Stay right there. I'll handle it." Loretta nodded, though she knew he couldn't see her. "Thank you," she said quietly. Before she ended the call, Theodore added, "This won't take long. And Loretta? Don't let him get under your skin. You don't owe him anything." Loretta's lips curved into a faint smile. "I know. I'll wait." She ended the call, slipping her phone back into her bag with deliberate care. She turned to Captain Morrison, whose smug expression hadn't wavered. If anything, he looked more confident now, as though he'd won some unspoken battle. Loretta found his confidence almost amusing. He had no idea who he was dealing with. The minutes that followed were quiet but tense. Loretta stood by the staircase leading to the jet, her posture composed, her gaze unwavering. She could feel the eyes of the other staff on her, their curiosity palpable. A few whispered among themselves, their voices too low to make out, but the glances they stole in her direction were enough to confirm she was the topic of conversation. Captain Morrison, meanwhile, leaned casually against the staircase railing, his arms still crossed. He looked at her with the kind of disdain reserved for someone he believed beneath him. "Look," he said finally, breaking the silence. His tone was patronizing, as if he were addressing a child. "I don't mean to be difficult, ma'am, but we have protocols for a reason. It's nothing personal." Loretta tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but unreadable. "Nothing personal?" she echoed, her voice soft but firm. "Captain Morrison, what part of this isn't personal? The part where you dismissed my reservation without even looking at it? Or the part where you implied I don't belong here?" The pilot's smugness faltered for the briefest of moments, but he quickly recovered, shrugging as though her words held no weight. "I'm just doing my job." Loretta's eyes narrowed slightly, though her voice remained steady. "Is it your job to assume the worst about your clients? To question their legitimacy based on appearances?" Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by the distant rumble of an approaching car. Both of them turned toward the sound, their conversation forgotten, as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the terminal entrance. The vehicle's polished exterior gleamed under the sun, its tinted windows concealing the occupants inside. Loretta recognized the car immediately. A small smile tugged at the corners of her lips as the driver's door opened and Theodore stepped out, his movements brisk and purposeful. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, his presence commanding without effort. Behind him, two other men in suits exited the car, their expressions serious. The atmosphere on the tarmac shifted instantly. The whispers among the staff grew louder, tinged with curiosity and uncertainty. Captain Morrison straightened, his casual demeanor replaced by a more guarded stance. He clearly didn't know who Theodore was, but the man's arrival had unsettled him. Theodore's gaze found Loretta, and his expression softened for a moment, a silent reassurance passing between them. Then his eyes shifted to Morrison, and the warmth disappeared, replaced by a cold, calculating intensity. Loretta stayed where she was, letting her husband take the lead. She trusted him to handle the situation with the precision and authority it required. Theodore approached with measured steps, his gaze fixed on Morrison. When he spoke, his voice was calm but carried a weight that silenced the whispers around them. "Captain Morrison, is it?" he said, his tone making it clear he already knew the answer. Morrison nodded, his posture stiff. "That's correct. And you are?" Theodore didn't answer immediately. Instead, he let the question hang in the air, his silence more powerful than any immediate response. Finally, he said, "Theodore Graham, my wife, Loretta, is the client you've been harassing." Morrison's eyes widened slightly, the color draining from his face. "I wasn't harassing anyone," he stammered. "There must be some misunderstanding." Theodore's expression didn't change. "The only misunderstanding here," he said coolly, "is your assumption that you could treat my wife with disrespect and get away with it." Morrison opened his mouth to respond, but Theodore raised a hand, silencing him. "Save your excuses. We'll address this properly. For now, step aside." The pilot hesitated, his pride warring with the sudden realization of his precarious position. Finally, he stepped back, his shoulders stiff with resentment. Loretta, watching the exchange, felt a flicker of satisfaction. Justice was beginning to take its course. The tension on the tarmac was palpable as Theodore Graham turned his attention to the gathered staff. His presence, imposing yet restrained, seemed to demand respect without a single word. His tailored suit caught the sunlight, the sharp lines of his silhouette exuding the authority of a man who wasn't used to being questioned. Loretta stood silently near the base of the jet staircase, her gaze steady as she observed the unfolding scene. She didn't need to intervene. This was Theodore's moment to address the disrespect she'd endured. And if there was one thing she knew about her husband, it was that he didn't let such offenses go unchecked. Theodore addressed the nearby staff first, his tone calm, but with a razor-sharp edge. "Who is the station manager here?" he asked, his gaze sweeping over the group. A petite woman in a Navy uniform hesitated before stepping forward. Her name tag read Anna Walker, and she looked visibly nervous as she approached. "That would be me, sir," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Theodore's gaze settled on her, not unkind but unyielding. "Anna, is this the standard protocol for your station? To question the validity of a client's reservation without reviewing their documentation? Or to humiliate them publicly based on assumptions?" Anna swallowed hard, her cheeks flushing a deep crimson. "No, sir," she stammered. "I wasn't aware of what happened until just now. I apologize if there was any misunderstanding." Theodore nodded slightly, his expression unreadable. "It's not your apology I'm waiting for." He turned to Captain Morrison, who was still standing stiffly by the staircase. "Captain Morrison," Theodore began, his tone cold enough to make the temperature on the tarmac seem to drop. "Would you care to explain your actions? My wife is an established client of this company with a confirmed reservation. Yet you deemed it appropriate to deny her entry and question her ownership of this jet. What?" Morrison's jaw tightened, his earlier smugness now replaced by visible discomfort. He seemed to weigh his words carefully, knowing that the wrong response could seal his fate. "I was following security protocols," he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. "I wasn't sure if the documentation was legitimate. It's standard procedure to verify." Theodore's eyes narrowed, the faintest trace of a sardonic smile curving his lips. "Security protocols? Interesting. I've reviewed those protocols myself, Captain. Nowhere does it state that you're authorized to disregard valid documentation or make arbitrary decisions based on personal bias. So, I ask you again, why did you refuse to let her board?" Morrison's discomfort deepened, beads of sweat forming at his temples despite the mild weather. I thought," he trailed off, unable to articulate a justification that wouldn't incriminate him further. "You thought what?" Theodore pressed, his voice low and cutting. "That she didn't fit your preconceived notion of who should own a private jet? That her appearance disqualified her from being a legitimate client?" "I didn't mean," Morrison began, but Theodore raised a hand to silence him. "Stop," he said, his tone final. "I don't need to hear your excuses. What I need is accountability. The air was heavy with silence as Theodore turned to Anna again. Anna, as the station manager, I hold you responsible for ensuring your staff adheres to the highest standards of professionalism. Clearly, that has not been the case today. I trust you'll ensure a full report of this incident is submitted to corporate by the end of the day. Anna nodded quickly, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Theodore's gaze returned to Morrison. As for you, Captain Morrison, he said, his voice dropping to an icy calm. Consider this your final flight with this company. You're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Morrison's face drained of color. You can't be serious, he blurted out, his tone a mixture of disbelief and desperation. I've been with this company for years. And yet, Theodore interrupted, his voice like steel, you've clearly learned nothing about treating clients with respect. This isn't just about your behavior today, though that alone would be grounds for termination. It's about the culture of entitlement and prejudice you bring to this role. That ends now. Morrison opened his mouth to protest further, but seemed to think better of it. His shoulders slumped as the weight of Theodore's words sank in. Theodore didn't wait for a response. He turned back to Loretta, his expression softening as his eyes met hers. Are you ready to board, love? He asked, his voice warm now, a stark contrast to the icy tone he'd used moments earlier. Loretta smiled faintly, her composure intact. I am, she said, stepping forward to take his offered hand. As they ascended the staircase together, the gathered staff watched in silence, the gravity of what had just happened sinking in. Theodore paused at the top of the steps, turning back to address them one last time. Let this be a reminder, he said, his voice carrying over the tarmac, that respect isn't optional. It's a requirement. With that, he escorted Loretta into the jet, the door closing behind them with a finality that seemed to echo across the airstrip. Inside the jet, Loretta settled into one of the plush leather seats, the tension in her shoulders finally easing. Theodore sat across from her, his gaze softening as he reached for her hand. Are you okay? He asked gently. She nodded, her lips curving into a small smile. I am now. Thank you. He squeezed her hand, his expression tender but resolute. You shouldn't have to deal with things like this. Not ever. Loretta's smile widened, a glimmer of pride shining in her eyes. It's not the first time, and it probably won't be the last. But I know how to handle it, and I know I have you in my corner. Theodore leaned back in his seat, a small smile playing on his lips. Always, he said. Now, let's get you to Paris. You've got a deal to close. The jet's engines roared to life, the sound a reassuring hum as they prepared for takeoff. Loretta gazed out the window, the tarmac below growing smaller as the jet ascended into the sky. Despite the rocky start to the day, she felt a sense of triumph, not just for herself, but for every unspoken battle won against prejudice. This was just one victory in a much larger fight, but it was a victory nonetheless. And Loretta Graham wasn't the kind of woman to back down from a fight. The jet glided through the clouds, the hum of its engines a soothing backdrop. Loretta sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the vast expanse of blue and white beyond. The sunlight streamed through, casting a warm glow across the luxurious cabin. Yet her mind wasn't on the beauty outside. It was replaying the events of the past hour. Theodore sat across from her, sipping a glass of sparkling water. He'd returned to his usual composed demeanor, but she knew him well enough to sense the simmering frustration he was still working through. His movements were precise, deliberate, the way they always were when he was trying to suppress anger. Loretta leaned back in her seat, crossing her legs gracefully. Her hands rested on the armrests, though one finger tapped lightly, betraying her thoughts. After a moment, she spoke, her voice soft but thoughtful. Do you ever wonder, she began, how many people deal with situations like that, and just let it go? Theodore set his glass down on the small table between them, his dark eyes meeting hers. Too many, he said simply. And too often. Her gaze returned to the window. I keep thinking about how confident he was, she said, her voice tinged with disbelief. As if his assumptions were fact, as if he couldn't possibly be wrong. Theodore leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. That kind of confidence isn't earned, he said. It's inherited. It's the kind of arrogance that comes from years of being in a system that rewards people like him for thinking they're untouchable. Loretta turned to him, her lips curving into a faint smile. You handled it well, she said. I could see how angry you were, but you didn't let it show. He chuckled softly, though there was little humor in it. Believe me, It took everything I had to stay calm when I heard what he said to you. He shook his head, his jaw tightening. You deserve better than that, Loretta. Everyone does. She reached across the table, her hand brushing against his. And you made sure he understood that, she said. But it's not just about me, Theodore. It's about the fact that this keeps happening to people who don't have someone like you to call. To people who don't have the resources to fight back. Theodore's expression softened, and he turned his hand over to clasp hers. I know, he said quietly, and it's why I'm not stopping here. Her brow furrowed slightly. What do you mean? He straightened in his seat, his tone firm now. Anna, the station manager, is filing a report, but that's not enough. I'll be talking to the board about this. It's time we set stricter policies, not just for conduct, but for training, sensitivity, inclusivity, the whole spectrum. Loretta studied him for a moment, a flicker of admiration in her eyes. You're serious about this? Of course I am, he said, his voice unwavering. You think I'm going to let this slide after what happened to you? After everything we've seen and experienced? She smiled softly, her heart swelling with pride. You're a good man, Theodore Graham. He laughed, shaking his head. Don't give me too much credit. It shouldn't take something personal for me, or anyone, to do what's right. The flight attendant entered the cabin then, her demeanor professional but warm. She placed a tray of hors d'oeuvres on the table and refilled Theodore's glass before turning to Loretta. Mrs. Graham, she said, her voice gentle. Is there anything I can get for you? Perhaps a glass of wine. Loretta glanced up, momentarily caught off guard by the woman's genuine kindness. It was such a contrast to the earlier hostility she'd faced. She smiled politely. No, thank you. Water will be fine. The attendant nodded and poured a glass for her before retreating to the galley. As the door clicked shut behind her, Loretta took a sip, letting the cool liquid ease her parched throat. It's funny, she said after a moment, her tone contemplative. For every person like Captain Morrison, there are people like her, kind, respectful, doing their job without judgment. Theodore nodded. It's the contrast that makes it so jarring. You walk into a situation expecting basic decency, and when it's denied to you, it feels wrong. Unnatural. Loretta leaned her head back against the plush leather, her eyes closing briefly. I've dealt with it my whole life, she said softly. We both have. But it never gets easier, does it? No, Theodore said, his voice quiet. It doesn't. But we've also learned to rise above it, to turn it into fuel for something better. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. You really believe we can change things? That enough people will listen? Theodore's expression hardened slightly, his determination clear. If they won't listen willingly, we'll make them listen. By being louder, by being unrelenting. People like Morrison thrive on complacency, on the hope that their actions won't have consequences. We're here to prove them wrong. Loretta smiled, her chest filling with a sense of hope she hadn't expected. You always know the right thing to say. He grinned, his demeanor lightening. It's my job as your husband. That, and making sure you get to Paris without any more unnecessary drama. She laughed softly, the tension in her body finally beginning to dissipate. Well, you're doing an excellent job so far. Theodore raised his glass, a playful glint in his eye. To Paris, then, and to never letting people like Morrison get the last word. Loretta clinked her glass against his, the soft sound a promise of resilience and hope. As the jet continued its journey, she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing that whatever battles lay ahead, she wouldn't be facing them alone. The gentle descent of the jet into Paris was accompanied by the rhythmic voice of the captain over the intercom, announcing their arrival. Loretta stared out the window as the city came into view, its iconic skyline glowing in the warm hues of the setting sun. The Eiffel Tower stood tall in the distance, its steel frame catching the golden light as if welcoming her home. The hum of the engine softened, and the plane's motion slowed. Loretta adjusted her seat belt, feeling a quiet anticipation for what lay ahead. The trip was pivotal for her business, but it also felt personal now, an opportunity to reclaim the day's narrative and push forward with dignity and determination. Theodore, seated across from her, closed his laptop and set it aside. Paris never gets old, does it? He remarked, his voice breaking the comfortable silence between them. Loretta smiled faintly, still gazing out the window. No, it doesn't. There's something timeless about this city. It feels like every visit offers something new, yet familiar. He leaned back in his seat, studying her for a moment. How are you feeling? He asked, his tone gentle but probing. She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Better, she admitted. Calmer. but there's still a part of me that keeps replaying what happened earlier. I know I shouldn't dwell on it, but Theodore reached across the table and took her hand, his touch warm and steady. You're allowed to dwell on it, he said softly. What happened wasn't just a moment of inconvenience. It was a reminder of a larger issue. It's okay to process it. Loretta looked down at their joined hands, her thumb tracing small circles against his. It's just exhausting, she said finally. Always having to prove myself. Always being questioned, scrutinized, even when I do everything right. Theodore's grip on her hand tightened slightly, his expression pained. I know, he said quietly, and I hate that you have to go through it. But you're not alone in this. You never will be. She met his gaze, her eyes softening. I know, she said, and that makes all the difference. The jet touched down smoothly on the private runway, and soon the cabin was filled with the quiet bustle of final preparations. The flight attendant reappeared, ensuring Loretta and Theodore had everything they needed before disembarking. Her demeanor was as attentive as ever, her professionalism a stark contrast to the pilot's earlier behavior. As Loretta stepped out onto the tarmac, the crisp Parisian air greeted her, carrying with it the faint scent of rain and freshly turned earth. She paused for a moment, inhaling deeply, letting the coolness ground her. The sky above was a canvas of soft purples and blues, the first stars beginning to twinkle. A sleek black car awaited them at the base of the staircase, its driver standing by with a polite bow. Theodore guided Loretta toward the vehicle, his hand resting lightly on her lower back, a quiet gesture of reassurance. Once inside, the city unfolded before them as the car navigated the streets toward their hotel. Loretta watched as familiar landmarks passed by. The Seine, its waters glimmering under the city lights. The Louvre, its glass pyramid illuminated against the night. The cafes spilling warm, golden light onto cobblestone sidewalks. Theodore glanced at her, his eyes studying her profile in the dim light. What's on your mind? He asked. She smiled faintly, still gazing out the window. Perspective, she said. How this city always manages to make me feel small, but in a way that's humbling, not diminishing. Like it's reminding me that the world is bigger than the challenges I face. He nodded, a soft smile tugging at his lips. That's one way to look at it, he said. But I'd argue that the world's size doesn't diminish you at all. It just highlights how much you've already accomplished and how much more you're capable of. She turned to him, her smile deepening. You always know how to make me feel like I can take on anything. That's because you can, he said, his tone matter of fact. And you will. The car pulled up to the hotel, a historic building adorned with intricate carvings and gilded accents. The doorman opened their doors with a welcoming smile, and they stepped out onto the red-carpeted entrance. Inside, the lobby was a symphony of elegance. Marble floors polished to a mirror-like shine, crystal chandeliers casting soft light across the space, and plush seating arrangements inviting guests to linger. Loretta couldn't help but feel a sense of awe. Even after all her travels, Paris had a way of making everything feel extraordinary. They checked in quickly, the staff attentive and courteous. Loretta noted the subtle difference in tone, the unspoken acknowledgement of their status. It was a stark reminder of the privilege she now carried, a privilege that shielded her in some spaces, but did little to erase the prejudices she still faced. Their suite was a sanctuary, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of the Eiffel Tower. Loretta stepped onto the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. She leaned against the railing, her gaze fixed on the city below. Theodore joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. They stood in silence for a moment, the lights of Paris stretching out before them like a sea of stars. Tomorrow's a big day, he said finally, his voice low and steady. Are you ready? She nodded, her eyes never leaving the view. I am, she said. Today might have started with a reminder of the obstacles we face, but it's ending with a reminder of why I keep going. Theodore smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. That's the Loretta Graham I know. She laughed softly, leaning into him. Let's hope Paris is ready for her, she said, her voice tinged with quiet determination. As the city hummed below them, Loretta allowed herself to feel a spark of hope. The day's challenges had not defined her. They had only fueled her resolve. Tomorrow, she would step into her meeting with confidence, knowing she was more than ready to take on whatever came her way. The morning light spilled into the suite, illuminating the soft gold accents of the room's decor. Loretta sat at the small dining table, sipping her coffee as the hum of Paris awakened outside the windows. Her gaze was steady, focused, as she reviewed the final details of her proposal. The quiet clink of Theodore's spoon against his cup broke the silence. "Feeling prepared?" he asked, his voice calm but attentive. Loretta nodded slowly, setting her tablet down. "More than prepared," she said. "This isn't just about expanding the brand anymore. It's about proving something, too." Theodore studied her for a moment, then leaned forward. "Proving what?" Her lips pressed together thoughtfully before she answered. "That I belong. That I'm more than capable. That no amount of doubt or bias can stop me." He smiled, pride shining in his eyes. "You've already proven that, Loretta. To anyone who matters." "Maybe," she said, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "But there's power in reminding people." Theodore reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Just don't forget who you're really doing this for. You, not them." She met his gaze, her expression softening. "I won't," she said. "But I'd be lying if I said today doesn't feel like a statement." A car was waiting for them downstairs, its sleek black exterior gleaming in the morning sun. Loretta wore a tailored navy suit, its sharp lines accentuating her poise and professionalism. She paired it with a silk scarf in soft pastels, a quiet nod to her fashion roots. Her heels clicked confidently against the marble floor as they exited the hotel, the sound echoing faintly in the morning calm. The drive to the headquarters of the European conglomerate felt both endless and fleeting. Loretta alternated between mentally rehearsing her pitch and gazing out at the city streets, where pedestrians moved with purpose, cafes bustled with morning energy, and Paris carried on its timeless rhythm. Beside her, Theodore sat quietly, his presence a steadying force. When they arrived, the building loomed before them, a modern structure of steel and glass that reflected the bright sky. Loretta stepped out of the car, smoothing the fabric of her suit as she squared her shoulders. Theodore offered her a reassuring nod before the two entered together. The boardroom was on the top floor, its expansive windows offering a panoramic view of the city. Loretta took a moment to take it in the Eiffel Tower in the distance, the bustling streets below, and let it ground her. Around the long, polished table sat a dozen executives, their expressions ranging from polite curiosity to guarded skepticism. At the head of the table was Clara Dubois, the CEO, a woman whose reputation for decisiveness preceded her. She was impeccably dressed, her silver hair styled in a sharp bob, and her eyes, a piercing gray, held a mixture of interest and scrutiny as they met Loretta's. "Mrs. Graham," Clara said, her voice cool but polite. "Welcome. We've heard a great deal about you." "Thank you, Miss Dubois," Loretta replied, her tone poised. "It's an honor to be here." Theodore took a seat at the back of the room, leaving Loretta to command the floor. As she set up her presentation, the murmurs around the table subsided, and the air grew thick with anticipation. Loretta began her pitch with practiced ease, her voice steady and her words deliberate. She spoke of her vision for expanding her brand into Europe, highlighting its unique appeal and the growing demand for authentic, inclusive fashion. She backed her ideas with data, market trends, projected revenues, consumer demographics. Each slide of her presentation reinforced her case. As she spoke, she watched the reactions around the table. Some nodded subtly, their interest piqued. Others remained impassive, their expressions unreadable. But Loretta didn't let it shake her. She knew her pitch was solid, her numbers indisputable. This was her moment, and she intended to own it. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Then Clara leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. "An impressive presentation," Clara said, her tone measured. "But I do have questions. Your brand is gaining traction, yes, but it's still relatively young compared to some of the more established names in the market. What makes you confident that it can compete on this scale?" Loretta met Clara's gaze without hesitation. "Because we're offering something they aren't," she said. "Authenticity. Representation. Consumers aren't just looking for products. They're looking for brands that reflect their values and speak to their experiences. That's where we excel, and that's why we'll succeed." Clara raised an eyebrow, her expression thoughtful. "And how do you plan to address the challenges of entering a market as competitive as Europe's?" "By staying true to our vision," Loretta said firmly. "We've done our research. We know what resonates with our audience, and we've built a strategy to amplify that. We're not here to imitate. We're here to innovate." The room buzzed with low murmurs as the executives exchanged glances. Loretta could feel the shift in energy, the subtle change from skepticism to intrigue. But she wasn't done yet. "And one more thing," she said, her voice cutting through the whispers. "This isn't just about business for me. It's personal. Fashion has the power to tell stories, to break barriers, to create connections. That's the foundation of my brand, and that's why I'm standing here today." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, Clara nodded. "You make a compelling case, Mrs. Graham," she said. "We'll take some time to review the details, but I must say, you've given us much to think about." Loretta inclined her head. "Thank you," she said. "I look forward to hearing your decision." Theodore followed her gaze, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. "It's a beautiful thing, isn't it? To create without fear, without doubt." She turned back to him, her hands wrapped around the warm ceramic of her cup. "I envy that sometimes," she admitted. "The freedom to focus solely on the work, without the weight of judgment or prejudice." Alone now, Loretta sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The quiet of the suite was both comforting and oppressive, amplifying the sound of her own thoughts. She had been confident in the boardroom, had given everything she had, and yet doubt lingered like an unwelcome guest. She pulled her tablet from her bag, scrolling through the slides of her presentation. Each one felt familiar yet distant, as if they belonged to someone else. She paused on an image of her flagship store, a bright, vibrant space filled with customers who reflected the diversity her brand celebrated. The memory of opening that store came flooding back to her, the long hours, the sleepless nights, the countless obstacles she had overcome. That day had been a triumph, a testament to her resilience and vision. And now, here she was, fighting for the next chapter. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of her phone. She reached for it, her heart skipping a beat when she saw the email notification. The subject line read, "Decision from the Board of Du Bois Holdings." Loretta stared at the screen for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the message. Her pulse quickened, her breath catching in her throat. Finally, she tapped the email, her eyes scanning the text. The words were measured and professional, but their meaning was clear. The board had approved her proposal. For a moment, Loretta couldn't move. She reread the email twice, 3 times, to ensure she hadn't misunderstood. Relief washed over her, followed closely by a wave of emotion she hadn't anticipated. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the phone down, a soft, disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. Theodore appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting when he saw her. "Loretta?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. "What is it?" She turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "They said yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. His face broke into a wide smile, and in an instant, he was by her side, pulling her into a tight embrace. "I knew they would," he said, his voice warm and proud. "I told you, they'd be fools not to." Loretta laughed again, the sound light and unrestrained this time. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. "It's happening," she said, as if saying it aloud would make it more real. "It's really happening." "It is," Theodore agreed. "And it's because of you. Your hard work, your vision, your determination." She nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. The approval meant more than just an expansion. It was validation, a recognition of everything she had built and the promise of what was to come. That evening, they celebrated in their own quiet way. Theodore ordered room service, a feast of Parisian delicacies paired with a bottle of champagne. They sat by the windows, the city lights twinkling below, as they toasted to the victory. "To the future," Theodore said, raising his glass. "To us," Loretta added, clinking her glass against his. As the evening unfolded, Loretta allowed herself to savor the moment. The doubts and challenges of the day felt distant now, replaced by a sense of accomplishment and hope. She knew there would be more battles ahead, more moments of doubt and difficulty, but tonight, she let herself rest in the knowledge that she had faced one of those battles and won. Outside, Paris continued to glow, a city of dreams and resilience, much like Loretta herself. The morning after her triumph was calm and unhurried. The Parisian sun poured through the tall windows of the suite, bathing the room in soft light. Loretta stirred awake, the warmth of accomplishment still wrapped around her like a comforting blanket. For a moment, she simply lay there, staring at the ornate ceiling, letting the realization sink in. She had done it. Her reverie was interrupted by the faint buzz of her phone on the bedside table. Loretta reached for it, her brows furrowing slightly when she saw the notification. It was a news alert. The headline, sharp and biting, "Pilot's discrimination sparks controversy at private airstrip." Sitting up, Loretta tapped on the article, her heart sinking as she began to read. The story detailed the events at the airstrip, but it wasn't just about her encounter with Captain Morrison. The article revealed his history, patterns of biased behavior that had gone unchecked for years. There were testimonies from other clients who had experienced similar treatment, their stories now coming to light in the wake of Loretta's stand. Loretta's phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Theodore. "Turn on the news," it read. She walked into the living room, where Theodore was already seated, his laptop open on the coffee table. The television was on, tuned to an international news channel. A familiar voice caught her attention, Clara Dubois, the CEO of the European conglomerate she had just partnered with. Clara stood at a podium, her silver hair gleaming under the studio lights. Her expression was one of calm authority, but there was an unmistakable edge to her words. "As a company, we have always prided ourselves on upholding the highest standards of professionalism and inclusivity," Clara said. "The behavior exhibited by Captain Morrison toward Mrs. Loretta Graham was unacceptable, and we are taking immediate action to ensure such incidents are never repeated. Effective today, Captain Morrison has been terminated from his position, and we are launching a full review of our hiring and training practices." Loretta sank into a chair, her eyes fixed on the screen. The weight of Clara's words hit her with unexpected force. This wasn't just about one pilot's actions. It was a reckoning for a culture that had allowed such behavior to persist. Theodore closed his laptop, turning to Loretta with a thoughtful expression. "It's poetic, isn't it?" he said. "The same man who thought he could judge you, humiliate you, is now facing the consequences of his own actions." Loretta nodded slowly, her mind replaying the confrontation on the tarmac. "It's more than just him," she said. "It's about the system that let him feel like he could act that way without repercussions." Theodore leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "And you just showed them that there are repercussions. That people won't stand for it anymore." A faint smile tugged at Loretta's lips. "It's strange," she said. "I wasn't trying to make a statement that day. I just wanted to board my plane and go to Paris. But somehow, it became so much bigger than that." "Because it was never just about you," Theodore said. "It's about everyone who's ever been underestimated, dismissed, or judged unfairly. You gave them a voice." Loretta's phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a colleague in the fashion industry. "Saw the news. You handled that with so much grace. Proud to know you." Similar messages began to flood in, each one a reminder of the ripple effect her actions had created. Later that day, as Loretta and Theodore prepared to leave the hotel for a meeting, a knock sounded at the door. Theodore opened it to reveal a courier holding an envelope with the logo of Dubois Holdings. Loretta opened the envelope to find a handwritten note from Clara Dubois herself. The message was short but meaningful. "Your grace and determination inspired us to act. Thank you for reminding us of the importance of accountability." Attached was an invitation to a formal dinner the following evening, a celebration of their new partnership. Loretta folded the note carefully, her heart swelling with a mixture of pride and humility. She turned to Theodore, who was watching her with a knowing smile. "Looks like your impact is already making waves," he said. As they stepped out of the hotel and into the vibrant streets of Paris, Loretta couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought her here. The sting of Morrison's words on the tarmac, the weight of the boardroom pitch, and now the unfolding consequences of those events, it all felt like part of a larger tapestry. Karma had come full circle, not just for Morrison, but for a culture that had allowed prejudice to go unchecked. And in its place, there was now the promise of change, of a future where people like Loretta wouldn't have to fight so hard to be seen, heard, and respected. As they walked toward their car, Loretta slipped her arm through Theodore's, a quiet determination in her stride. This was just the beginning. There was still so much to do. But for now, she allowed herself to savor the moment, a moment of justice, of triumph, of hope. Paris shimmered around them, a city of light and resilience, much like the woman who had fought to claim her place in its story. The evening of the formal dinner arrived, a night brimming with elegance and promise. Loretta stood in front of the mirror in their hotel suite, adjusting the intricate clasp of her necklace. Her gown, a deep emerald that shimmered subtly in the light, fit her perfectly, a reflection of her confidence and grace. Theodore appeared behind her, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. His eyes met hers in the mirror, a soft smile playing on his lips. "You look stunning," he said, his voice warm and steady. Loretta turned to face him, her smile mirroring his. "And you look like my perfect counterpart," she replied. "Thank you for standing by me through all of this." He took her hands in his gaze unwavering. "There's nowhere else I'd rather be," he said. "This is your night, Loretta. Own it." She nodded, a flicker of determination sparking in her eyes. "I intend to." The venue was a grand ballroom, its gilded walls and crystal chandeliers exuding timeless sophistication. The air hummed with the soft murmur of conversation and the gentle clink of glasses. Loretta and Theodore entered arm in arm, their presence commanding quiet attention. Clara Dubois greeted them near the entrance, her silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers. Her handshake was firm, her smile genuine. "Mrs. Graham, Mr. Graham," she said, her voice warm. "Welcome. I'm so glad you could join us." "Thank you for the invitation," Loretta replied, her tone poised but warm. "It's an honor to be here." Clara's eyes lingered on Loretta for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "You've made quite an impression, Mrs. Graham," she said. "Not just with your business proposal, but with the grace and strength you've shown throughout this process. It's inspiring." "Thank you," Loretta said softly. "But I couldn't have done it alone. I've been fortunate to have the right people by my side." Clara smiled knowingly. "That's true for all of us. Now, please, enjoy the evening. There are many here who are eager to meet you." As the night unfolded, Loretta found herself surrounded by conversations that ranged from lighthearted to deeply meaningful. Executives, designers, and influencers approached her, each eager to share their admiration for her work and her story. She listened intently, her responses thoughtful and measured, but her heart swelled with pride as she realized the depth of the impact she had made. At one point, she found herself alone on the balcony, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The city of Paris stretched out before her, its lights twinkling like a sea of stars. She rested her hands on the railing, her gaze sweeping over the skyline. "You've come a long way," Theodore's voice said softly behind her. She turned to see him leaning casually against the doorway, his eyes full of warmth and pride. "I have," she said, her voice tinged with wonder. "But it still feels surreal sometimes, to think about where I started and where I am now." Theodore stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her waist as they looked out over the city together. "That's because you never settled," he said. "You fought for what you deserved, for what others deserve too." She leaned into him, the weight of the moment settling over her in a comforting way. "It's not just about me anymore," she said. "It's about paving the way for others, making sure they don't have to fight as hard." "And you're doing that," Theodore said. "Every step you take, every door you open, it makes a difference." Loretta nodded, her resolve solidifying. "Then I'll keep going," she said, "for as long as it takes." The night ended with a toast. Clara stood at the head of the room, her glass raised, as she spoke of resilience, innovation, and the power of diversity. When she mentioned Loretta by name, the room erupted in applause, the sound washing over her like a wave. Loretta raised her own glass, her gaze sweeping over the room. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, not just for her achievements, but for the journey that had brought her here. And as the applause died down, Loretta exchanged a glance with Theodore, a silent understanding passing between them. This was more than a celebration, it was a beginning. Months later, Loretta stood in the middle of her brand new flagship store in Paris. The space, alive with color and energy, was a testament to her vision. The walls were adorned with art that celebrated diversity, and the racks were filled with pieces that reflected her philosophy of inclusive, authentic fashion. As she greeted the first wave of customers, she felt a sense of fulfillment that was hard to put into words. This wasn't just a store, it was a statement, a testament to everything she had fought for. Later that evening, she sat in her office, reviewing plans for the next phase of her expansion. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts, and Theodore stepped in, holding a small box. "What's this?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Open it," he said, a playful smile on his lips. She did, her breath catching when she saw the contents. It was a silver lock, engraved with their initials and the date of her boardroom victory. "For the bridge," he said. "A reminder of how far you've come." Loretta smiled, tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. "Thank you." she said softly. For everything. Theodore took her hand, his gaze steady. This is just the beginning, he said. There's so much more to come. And as Loretta looked at the lock, she knew he was right. The journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. And she was ready for whatever came next. And so, in a single moment, everything changed, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. This wasn't just a story of justice. It was a story of strength, resilience, and proving that respect is never optional. If this story inspired you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Let's keep sharing stories that empower, challenge, and remind us all that the fight for respect and equality is one worth having. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.